Welcome back to Art 2D. What we're doing today is working on a jellyfish. So your job is going to be to follow along. You may have to pause this video at different times to be able to do that. You're going to use your larger of the two brushes that you have. If you have several, that's fine. Pick a large round brush or a large flat brush. And you're also going to use blue. First thing we're going to do is just cover the paper with water. This is a little bit different than anything we've done yet with our practice. The goal here is to really focus on the outer edges and to almost make kind of a circular motion. You'll see why as this develops. You might notice that your paper starts to do what's called buckling, and that just means that it'll rise up in the center when it's wet. But it's okay, you can hold it down, it'll eventually lay down. Here you can begin adding intense blue to the edges and pulling it around using water to fade it towards the middle. Notice that I'm not attempting to make it smooth because this will represent the water that the jellyfish lives in, and texture would be a nice thing for the illusion of water. So I'm intentionally putting intense blue at the edges, kind of rounding out the corners, and then using water to fade it inward. The reason why we washed the water across the page to begin with is so that this can go on more smoothly and that the paint won't go straight into the paper and stick. It gives it a little more fluidity. So as I make my way around, I'm going to continue dipping into the water and then moving that paint towards the center little by little. I don't want the edges to become the same intensity as the middle, or vice versa. This should remind you a lot of the skill we worked on just recently when we learned about our paints and faded them all the way across in a row. Once you're done establishing the blue around the edges, you're going to want to get a little bit of red. And the reason why is that we're actually going to create black. And if you remember when we tried to make purple before, red and blue mixed together in this format did not make purple. In fact, when we had a lot of blue versus a little bit of red, we got a nice deep black. If you have more red than blue, like I do here, it'll actually turn brown, which I don't recommend for what we're doing in this illusion. So I'm going to add a little more blue to my own black. Just a drop or two is enough to move that over to black. Now we're going to add the black into the very edges to deepen the water and give it a mysterious feel. This color might actually fade and deteriorate a little bit as we do more techniques. It may not stay pitch black. If you like that really rich dark black, you can always reinforce it a few more times after completing this step and drying it. Now I'm using water to sort of cause it to intermix and bleed across the blue. If it takes away too much of your blue, you can always add more blue. Just play around with it a little bit till you get the look that you want. Once you get your black established the way that you want it to look and it's interplaying with the blue, the next thing I would advise you to do is stop and use a blow dryer to cause the whole thing to dry, especially in the middle, because that's where we're going to begin to paint our jellyfish. So when you touch the middle, you should feel that it is not cool to the touch, but that it's dry. Next, you're going to use blue and yellow to make green. Of course, blue is more dominant than green, so just take a small amount of the blue into the yellow carefully until you get the desired green that you're looking for. I just chose green at random for this jellyfish. Technically, you could do this step in any color that you want, including blue. The first thing you'll do is create a very intense line in the shape of sort of like an open letter C. It's facing towards the middle of the composition. Next, you'll use just water on your brush to gently fade the color towards the middle. Again, this is color intensity fading just like we did on the edges. We're just applying it to the bell of the jellyfish. What I'm doing now is I'm drawing a wavy line to represent the bottom of the jellyfish form, and I'm fading its edge inward as well. Sometimes you're doing this step and you might find that you put too much on. So that's what you see me doing. I'm removing and correcting the green I placed in the middle. Remember, you can do that with a dry brush. Just roll it across the middle to absorb any extra paint you don't want. Now what I have is that black again, and I'm just going around the edges. Actually, I'm wrong. That was my blue. I'm using my blue around the edges. You could use black. It would give it an even more intense look. This is actually just the blue, and it's going to play nicely with the green and sort of make a turquoise at the edge. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to begin creating a watery green. I don't need much of it, so I'm just going to use the side here, that little area. I put a little green on my brush, dipped it in the water, and I made a watery green. I have very little paint on my brush, so I have a lot of control, and I'm creating the back side edge of the open bell. It'll make more sense once you see it finished. Drying my brush, and now I'm kind of absorbing any extra because I want this to be really clean and not too runny or puddly. Now I'm going for my intense green, and I'm going to create the edge of that and add some definition. So this will hopefully create a nice illusion that the bottom of the jellyfish is open, since they're somewhat hollow there, and that will allow me to have a nice place to start building the rest of the jellyfish's body. I'm fading the inside edge using just a little bit of a damp, wet brush. So remember, you can add, you can take away, depending on how wet and how dry your brush is. And now, I believe it's time to move on to making the texture on the top of the bell. So I made some watery blue, and I'm splotching it around. You see me pushing down the middle of my paper. It happens to be buckled and rising up in the middle. This part of the process isn't so technical. It's more of a choice-based thing, but I want you to play around with disrupting that perfect center and adding some fun textures and patterns. You can add intense color on top of wet areas, and I know it doesn't show well on this camera view, but if you look at your own while you're doing it, you'll see that those colors sort of explode across the wet surface. It's like tiny little fireworks. And if they don't move enough, it just means that the paper isn't wet enough, so you can add more water to it. This jellyfish is starting to look a lot like a frog to me, or at least the texture and color of a frog. You could use a similar method, I suppose, to make a frog. Anyway, if you wanted to try this tutorial at home with your extra paper, trying like a yellow jellyfish or an orange jellyfish, you could make it any color you want, and then do these parts with an accent color of some kind. Now I'm actually adding drops of water to kind of help move things along because I wasn't pleased with where the texture was landing. Alright guys, so now it's actually time to begin the tentacles on the jellyfish. So I have clean water on my brush, and I'm simply going to carefully sketch out a leg using just water. And where I've got a lot of color built up, you will see that this watery line is actually eating through the paint. It's eroding that color away on the blue background, especially down the bottom right there. So I have a watery path, and by placing that path there, I can now begin to do some more color bombs. I'm going to put intense color into the water and let it explode across. These color bombs are a fun technique to play around with. I just had to give them a name because students and I didn't know what to call this. So we think it looks like little bombs exploding across the water, and that's why we've given it that name. So again, hard to pick up on camera, but definitely play around with this and I think you'll really enjoy it. You can of course use blue or green or really any color that you want to get your jellyfish legs. The nice thing about this technique is it causes those legs to have irregular coloration, so it looks really gelatinous or jelly-like. And that's the effect we're going for. So place your colors carefully where you want them. And if you decide the tentacle is too short, it's okay to add water to the end of it and elongate it or curl it. Those legs can really be arranged however you like. I've looked up jellyfish and found that they have any number of legs. In fact, their legs can come off and regrow, and so you can put the number of legs that you find pleasing to the eye. So now we're gonna speed things up a little bit, and you're gonna see me develop the other tentacles that I chose to place on this jellyfish. I'm just repeating the same steps, nothing really new. The water goes down first. If you crisscross them into the path of something you have wet, and then of course some of that color will pull over, and that's okay, as long as that's what you want. I made this one a little curly. And then I paused after this one to show you how to make a different type of tentacle that many jellyfish have. I don't know what this is called. One of you guys who are a little more studious about animals can look it up and let me know. But if you squiggle your brush as though your hand is shaking uncontrollably, you can create these lace-like forms coming out of the center of the jellyfish. And that's just a different type of tentacle that are often shorter and hang in the middle. Sometimes they're actually longer. Again, it just depends on the jellyfish. And then add a few more legs however you want, and place them where you want in the composition. Just do what looks good to you. And now finally we're at the end phase. My edges are dry, and what I'm doing is I'm using water to erode these little circular shapes that are going to represent bubbles. So I'm using the water and placing it in kind of a circular shape, and then drying my brush and actually picking some of that water up. You also saw me flick the water, which adds another type of erosion, just smaller bubbles. You can flick some blue on there and some green on there if you want, just to add a little more splash and fun. I hope you guys really enjoyed this. Cannot wait to see what you come up with. Alright, that's it for today guys. Submit your work to the assignment Jellyfish tutorial.